This is Stephen Nojiri, and this is going to be part 3 of the Lineage series. In this video, we're going to focus on what we're going to call the Oda and Toyotomi line. Now, this is not referring specifically to Oda Nobunaga or Toyotomi Hideyoshi themselves, but it is referring to lines of practitioners within the Oda forces and the Toyotomi forces. As you watch and listen to the video and look at the charts provided, this will make more sense as to why we're calling it the Oda Toyotomi lines. So we have looked at the Kusunoki line and the Yoshitsune lines. But now, as I said, this is going to be the Oda and Toyotomi line. Now, this line is comprised of interlocking factors from the Kusunoki line and the Tada Genji line. Families and individuals who receive trainings from both sources. So again, even though we're going to refer to it as the Oda Toyotomi line, the listener should understand that this also uh, goes hand in hand with Kusunoki lines. In other words, to summarize that, the individuals that are in the Oda Toyotomi line, some have Tada Genji background, some have Kusunoki background. Most of them appear to have a background that is comprised of both Tada Genji and some kind of Kusunoki or Southern Court training. So to start, let's go back to the beginning of Tada Genji. Genji Mitsunaka lived 912-997 AD. He was also known as Tada Manju. This is the beginning of the Tada Genji. We're not going to focus on the details of him, but feel free to Google him, feel free to look him up in whatever sort of encyclopedias you may have. He's a famous figure, and he's known for being an excellent Saabushi for the empire. So Genji Mitsunaka is where it begins. In particular, it goes to his son Genji Yorimitsu, 948 to 1021. Genji Yorimitsu was definitely a hitter for the empire. He was a hero of the day. One of his most famous exploits was when he defeated the bandits of Oyama, or of Oi Mount. The Yama means mountain, so the mountain called Oi, so Oi Mountain, Oyama bandits. Absolute. This is a real event that took place in history, but it's also been sort of turned into legend. According to the Tada Genji documents, the bandits of this mountain were cannibals, but in story form, they're known as oni, demons, monsters, yokai, etc., etc., etc. But the historical it was cannibal bandits, and this also goes hand in hand with the fact that Genji Yorimitsu, aside from being a major hitter for the empire, he's also in legend known as a demon hunter. So now what we're going to do is we're going to now move forward. So all the individuals who are going to appear later somehow connect back to those two. So for this particular line, it's centering around a group from a place called Kawachi, which is eastern Osaka. This group is composed of families such as the Matsunaga, the Kusunoki, the Yasumi, and the Nojiri. And this group was involved in the campaign against the Miyoshi. So you had this prolonged war between the Miyoshi and the Hatakeyama and other forces in the Osaka area. And they were involved in that power struggle in the Osaka area. But this group specifically sides with Nobunaga. So when Nobunaga begins his rise to power, this group sides with Nobunaga, and they help Nobunaga take the Kyoto and the Osaka area. So within this group, you have the Kusunoki. So this is the main line of the Kusunoki family. The main line of the Kusunoki become retainers for Oda Nobunaga. This is clearly this is where the Tada line and the Kusunoki line clearly are intertwining at this point. You also have the Yasumi and the Nojiri. Now these are southern court supporters, and they are aligned with the Kusunoki family. Also, if you remember from a previous video, Kusunoki Masashige had created sort of a branch line through a general named Momonoi Naotsune. The Nojiri were also with Momonoi Naotsune. So this is showing the Kusunoki line aspect. But not just Kusunoki, as we see on this panel. The Nojiri descend from Genji Yorimitsu. Remember, Genji Yorimitsu is the son of Genji Mitsunaka. Genji Mitsunaka is Tada Manju. So Genji Mitsunaka is the start of the Tada Genji. And Genji Yorimitsu is his famous son, who's a hitter for the Empire and became known in legend as a demon hunter. So the Nojiri is a direct line of descendancy of Tada Genji. So what we have is we have a Kusunoki overlap and we have a Tada Genji overlap. So the family is primarily Tada Genji with Kusunoki overlap. Should also be noted that the Nojiri also come from the same Tada line branches that create the family that uses the last name Tada and the family that has the last name Baba. We should also point out that the Baba family is another lineage of Tada Genji found within Takeda Shingen's forces. One of Takeda Shingen's main generals is from the Baba family. So, under Oda Nobunaga, the Kusunoki become secretaries and tacticians. The Nojiri become intelligence officers and commanders of archery units. Now, if you remember, archery is a major component of the Tada Genji tradition. So seeing the Nojiri be commanders of the archery units is not surprising. And also, within Tada Genji and within Kusunoki, espionage and intelligence gathering is a major component. So it also makes sense to see the Kusunoki and the Nojiri being tacticians and secretaries and intelligence officers, spies, etc., etc. Now, the other two families that we listed earlier is unfortunately, a bit problematic for them. The Matsunaga attempt to turn on Oda Nobunaga and are summarily eliminated. This event also, unfortunately, almost causes the Yasumi family to disappear, as they were stuck in between the Matsunaga and Oda Nobunaga during this attempted sort of betrayal of Nobunaga. However, one surviving son of the Yasumi family survived to be the head of the family, so the family did survive, but in relative obscurity. Good news is, though, the Yasumi did form a gunnery school in the 1600s. When Oda Nobunaga died, a member of the Nojiri named Nojiri Hanbei was serving as a bodyguard for Nobunaga and died alongside him at Honnoji. Kusunoki Masatora, the head of the Kusunoki family, managed to survive the attack at Honnoji. But the fact that these two were so close to Nobunaga that they were present at Honnoji Temple really says a lot about how close they were to Nobunaga. Remember, when Nobunaga was staying at Honnoji, he only had his closest retainers, bodyguards, secretaries, tacticians. It was a small group of the people closest to Nobunaga that got attacked at Honnoji Temple. So to see Nojiri Hanbei and Kusunoki Masatora at Honnoji Temple speaks volumes about how close they were to Nobunaga. After Nobunaga's death, these retainers went into either direct service to Toyotomi Hideyoshi or service to one of Toyotomi's generals. Kusunoki Masatora, for example, became the secretary for Toyotomi Hideyoshi. The Nojiri end up in the service of Fukushima Masanori. And I'll take a moment to point out that the Nojiri are part of a larger family called the Kumazawa. And the Kumazawa are a branch of the Southern Court Emperor. And so the service comes about through one of Fukushima Masanori's chief retainers. One of his chief retainers is named Kumazawa Morihisa. Interestingly enough, Kumazawa Morihisa was the correct male to be the emperor through the Southern Court. The Kumazawa Morihisa technically should have been the emperor of Japan and not a samurai retainer. However, history being as it is, rather than being emperor, he was the chief retainer of Fukushima Masanori. The Nojiri, being part of the Kumazawa circle, or being part of this Kumazawa family, come into the service of Fukushima Masanori. And since the Nojiri had been archery captains and intelligence officers, we see that they serve as Fukushima Masanori's spies and intelligence operatives. Within the Tada documentation and the Jingunden documentation, we also see there's a couple other families that are listed. The Goto family is listed, and the Nimura family is listed. And so, for example, the Goto and the Nimura are cataloged as serving under Toyotomi and having been trained in Jingunden and Obo Shiden. Interestingly enough, the Jingunden and the Obo Shiden documents also state that training in Jingunden and Obo Shiden took place among the retainers of Fukushima Masanori. So this is showing that through the Tada Genji material that goes through the Nojiri and the Kumazawa, you see Tada Genji there in Fukushima Masanori's retainers. But also through the Jingunden and the Obo Shiden. In this particular case, we're talking Shotoku and Tachibana Den. But these Jingunden Obo Shiden documents also say that Jingunden and Obo Shiden is being studied and practiced among the retainers of Fukushima Masanori. So unfortunately, though, this is a very under-researched topic. Fukushima Masanori is not a very popular historical figure. But if ever Fukushima Masanori was to become a popular figure, it would be very interesting to see the amount of data and the amount of interesting historical truths that could be uncovered, because according to these Tada Genji and the Jingunden and the Obo Shiden, something significant with these traditions was definitely taking place among Fukushima Masanori's retainers. I would like to take a moment to step aside and point out a couple of interesting pieces of history. There is a clan called the Nosei, not the nose, the Nosei, 2 syllables, Nosei clan, running counter to the Tada Genji intention. Now, the Nosei clan are descendants of the Tada Genji, of the Tada family, specifically, using the last name Tada. But they're actually always running counter to the intention. For example, Tada Yorisada served the Southern Court, very loyal to the Southern Emperor. But his son was going to join the North when their army was being beaten. Yorisada forbid him to use the last name Tada. And since his son was going to change sides, he forced his son to change his name to Nosei. And he said, the Tada serve the emperor, they do not serve the shogun. Like, they do not serve other samurai. We serve the emperor. We are servants to the empire. We're not servants to the usurpers who don't know their place in the world. You are not allowed to use the name Tada. He strips him of Tada and gives him the name Nosei. So, and interestingly enough, we see so many Tada Genji supporting Oda Nobunaga. However, in keeping with going counter to the Tada Genji tradition, the Nosei fight against Oda Nobunaga and kind of get their asses kicked. Now let's also take a look at the siege of Osaka. The Siege of Osaka is a historically critical battle, not only just for samurai culture and history, but the political and economic fallout from it as well. It's overlooked by most samurai researchers because there's this mistaken idea that when you hit the year 1600 that the warring period is over. This is absolutely not true. The Siege of Osaka is pretty much proof that war is still massive carnage and blood and body count, up until the Siege of Osaka is finished. Now, remember earlier we mentioned the Goto family. The Goto family, unfortunately, sort of falls into just falls, almost disappears. It pretty much breaks to pieces when Goto Mototsugu dies in 1615. So the Goto family are serving the Toyotomi side of the siege of Osaka. So they are not on the Tokugawa side; they are on the Toyotomi side. And Goto Mototsugu dies, and that's pretty much the end of the family there. I also want to mention this though, leading up to the siege. The Tokugawa government had managed to eliminate most of the old guard of Toyotomi, such as Kato Kiyomasa. In 1611, the Tokugawa essentially began to, well, all right. Official history says that all of these old Toyotomi retainers suddenly just died for no apparent reason. However, uh, the Toyotomi side of the the Toyotomi side of the coin is that they were all killed. So, for example, Kato Kiyomasa in 1611, he's invited to meet with the Tokugawa, and then he dies of some kind of illness just a few days after meeting with Tokugawa. So, pretty much uh, standard history says that he just fell ill of some unknown disease and died, but pretty much everybody agrees he was poisoned. Um, but anyway, by 1611, a lot of the old guard had been eliminated. However, Fukushima Masanori's network of spies and intelligence officers kept Fukushima alive. For example, Fukushima was supposed to be at the same meeting that Kato Kiyomasa went to, and Fukushima's agents said, "Do not go. We will make up whatever kind of story we can, but you cannot go. You will be killed." And Fukushima did not go. Kato Kiyomasa went. Kato Kiyomasa died. Fukushima Masanori did not go. Fukushima Masanori did not die. So Fukushima Masanori is kept alive, and when the time of the actual siege of Osaka comes around, Fukushima Masanori is able to assist the Toyotomi forces during the siege indirectly. He gives support to Toyotomi. They through spies and supplies, he's able to support the Toyotomi faction without ever getting caught. He only gets caught one time. There's a grain silo that he lets the Toyotomi forces have, and he gets caught with that. But that is about the only thing that he officially gets caught with. Aside from the one grain silo incident, the Tokugawa cannot really find any proof of Fukushima's involvement. Again, and as I said, beyond an event involving a food storehouse. But in 1619, in an attempt to reduce his power regardless, so they haven't actually caught him, Fukushima spies are able to keep all of his assistance to the Toyotomi off the books. The Tokugawa cannot find any actual evidence of his assistance. They suspect it, but they cannot prove it. However, in 1619, regardless of having no proof, Fukushima Masanori is brought up on charges that relate to his castle being repaired when it wasn't so allowed to be repaired. It's a little bit more than that. It's actually more complicated than that, but in the end, that's what they decide to stick him with. They decide to ultimately charge him with repairing his castle when he's not supposed to have repaired his castle. And he did repair his castle because of a I think it was a hurricane or a storm. Something had broken some of the castle, but Masanori said, "Okay, fine," and then he dismantled the repairs. Like, he literally fixed the castle, but then he actually breaks it again. However, he's still accused of having done all of this as part of a larger plan to fortify his castle and his domain in preparation for a rebellion. So in 1619, as you standard history knows, he's stripped of the Hiroshima domain and moved out toward the Nagano area. But as I mentioned earlier, Kumazawa Morihisa stays in service with him until until Fukushima's death in 1624. And then from here on out, you're going to start to see, rather than these Tada Genji and Kusunoki practitioners and Jingunden practitioners being directly tied to sort of figures like Oda or the Toyotomi, Fukushima, they start to become Ronin or become associated with lesser powerful families at this point. So, for example, Nojiri Kazutoshi becomes a Ronin. He has a son. The son is adopted by his grandfather, that Kumazawa Morihisa, who was the chief Fukushima Masanori's right hand man. He's also should have been the Southern Emperor. And then, so when Nojiri Kazutoshi's son is adopted by his grandfather, the son takes the name Kumazawa Banzan. Now, if any of you guys are familiar with uh, Edo period sort of Ronin scholars, Kumazawa Banzan spent a lot of time, is a very famous sort of scholar, Ronin scholar in the 1600s. Um, Now we're going to bring it around. If you remember from the Kusunoki video, there is one of the Kusunoki Ryugungaku, the big Kusunoki War Academy, is run by Kusunoki Fuden, and then Yui Shosetsu takes over after Fuden dies. You then see Kumazawa Banzan spending a lot of time discussing tactics and ideology with Yui Shosetsu and Tokugawa Yorinobu. So if any of you guys are familiar with Natori-ryu, you would know this is a place where Tokugawa Yorinobu and then the Natori-ryu coming from one of Yorinobu's pages. So this is one of those incidents where then you can sort of track where some of this Kusunoki material is making its way through to the Natori-ryu through this aspect. When Yui Shosetsu, and you may or may not know about the Yui Shosetsu's rebellion, but I discussed it previously. You can research it yourself for more information. But when Yui Shosetsu's rebellion fails, he dies. Tokugawa Yorinobu is placed on house arrest. Kumazawa Banzan is almost arrested many times, but in the end, he doesn't really get arrested. Other than he gets put on house arrest. So this is by no means an exhaustive look at the sort of Oda Toyotomi retainer line. However, it's not, like I said, it's not exhausted at all, but we're just looking at examples, trying to give you, if we were to sit down and explain this, this would take hours to explain. I'm trying to give it to you within a reasonable amount of time. So very brief, extremely small look at one of the many lines associated with the Tada Genji material and the Jingunden and the Obo Shiden in general. We did not discuss the Takeda retainers and generals who are Tada Genji. Well, we did a little bit. We discussed very briefly that the Baba family found as retainers to the Takeda hold some of this Tada Genji material, and we didn't discuss so much the Tada family, like the people using the surname Tada, very much as well. We didn't discuss what they were doing during the 1500s and 1600s ultimately. I suppose I could tell you that the Tada family, people with the surname Tada, using the name Tada, they became sort of Ronin scholars and Ronin Gungaku masters during the 1600s and into the 1700s. Hopefully, the complexity of this topic is very apparent, so hopefully this shines some light and you understand that even though you've got all of this data, that there's much more data that hasn't been covered. And that is it for this video. As always, these videos are meant to be brief, and they are meant to inspire you or to give you a starting off point. The material in this video is copywritten by me, so please do not steal this material. Please do not take it. Please do not copy it. Again, I hope it inspires you. I hope that it sets you off on your own investigations and explorations, but please be respectful.